Hello. So hopefully you have already viewed your factoring quadratic video, so that you kind of have an idea how to do that before we get started. Today our first section is section 1.5. It's called quadratic equations. Hopefully you've already printed up the PowerPoint so that you don't have to write everything listed. If you prefer not to print up the PowerPoint, that's fine too. You can just write as you go, because it's important for you to take notes so you can use these notes later. Plus, some of my examples come directly from the homework, so it's really good if you make sure you either have the PowerPoint printed or you're copying down all your notes. Alright, let's get started. So it says definition of a quadratic equation. Quadratic equation in X is an equation that can be written in the general form. So this is our general form. Ax squared plus bx equals 0. Okay, now this, and it says a, b, and c are real numbers, and a cannot equal 0. If a equals 0, guess what? This whole x squared wouldn't even exist, and it would no longer be a quadratic. It would be a linear function. So that's why it says a cannot equal 0. Okay, for it to be a quadratic, we have to have a number represented there, even if it's 1. Now, as you'll learn with quadratics, if a is positive, it'll open up. You'll have a minimum. If a end up being negative, it'll open down. It'll have a maximum. So these are called parabolas. Parabolas. So hopefully that sounds kind of familiar. Quadratic equations, graph, parabolas. So when we're solving quadratic equations, we're actually looking to see where does the quadratic, where does the parabola cross the x-axis. We're trying to see where does it cross the x-axis. That means we're trying to figure out where does y equal 0. So that's why we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. We're trying to figure out where it equals 0. We're trying to figure out where does it cross the x-axis. Alright, so it starts off, solve a quadratic equation by factoring. So it says, if necessary, rewrite the equation in the general form. Step 2, factor. Step 3, apply the zero product principle, setting each factor containing a variable equal to 0. Step 4, solve. Step 5, check the solutions in the original equation. Step 5 is the one I a lot of times forget to do, but it's good to check your solutions. But a lot of times I forget. Okay, so here you go. It says use factoring to solve the quadratic equation. It says check by substitution or by using a graphing utility and identifying the x-intercepts. Okay, so here's our equation. X squared minus 6x minus 27 equals 0. So we have to factor it. When you're factoring it, you're trying to figure out what multiplies to give you this negative 27 and what combines to get you that bx, that negative 6. Okay, so if I list all the things that I can multiply to get me a negative 27, let's see, I have negative 1 times 27, positive 1 times a negative 27, right? Does 2 times anything give me 27? No, because 27 is not an even number. I can go negative 3 times 9, or positive 3 times a negative 9. 4 won't go, 5 won't go, 6 won't go, 7 won't go, 8 won't go, and then I'm back to 9. So these are all my factors. Now I got to figure out of my factors, negative 1 times 27, 1 times negative 27, negative 3 times 9, 3 times negative 9, which one, when I combine them together, will give me a negative 6. Okay, and this one, if I go 3 plus a negative 9 or 3 minus 9, that's the way to get a negative 6. So since those are my factors, then I have x plus 3 times x minus 9 equals 0. So that's because I have, it's like having a 1 in front of my x squared. If there was any other number besides a 1, I'd have more to do right here. But there's just like a 1 right there, so I could just write my factors. Okay, so then my next step said each one of my factors that have variables equal to 0. So I go x plus 3 equals 0. X minus 9 equals 0. And I have to solve both for x. Minus 3, because remember I got to do the opposite when I'm solving. X equals a negative 3. Over here when I solve, I got a minus 9. The opposite of minusing is adding. Plus 9 plus 9. X equals 9. So my solution, and it says use a comma to separate, would be negative 3, comma 9. And when you do your homework, because this is a homework question, you'd have to make sure you type the numbers inside the little brackets there. Okay? That wasn't so bad, was it? No. That's because we had a 1 in front of it. We have to do a little bit more thinking when we're factoring and there's not a 1 in front of it. Okay? Let's look at the next one. It says use factoring to solve the quadratic equation. Check by substitution or by using a graphing utility and identify the x-intercepts. Okay, so my first step is to get this in general form. This is not general form. I got 4x squared equals 7x plus 2. Before I can solve quadratics, I got to get one of my sides equal to 0. Okay, so I like to get my right side equal to 0. Some people like to move the easiest things. So a lot of people would say just minus 4x squared to both sides. Either way it go, you get the same answer in the end. I just like to move my 7x and my 2 over instead. Just my preference. There's more than one way to cook a potato. You just have to do it whichever way makes the most sense or fits best for you. So I got 4x squared minus 7x minus 2 equals 0. Now I have to start the steps for factoring. Okay, so for problem above, I didn't have a number in front of x squared. It was like having a 1 in front of my x squared. With this one, I have a 4 in front of my x squared, so my rules are a little different. So when I factor it in this, I have to multiply my a, which is 4, times my c, which is negative 2. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. So I got to figure out what numbers multiply to get me a negative 8 and combines or adds or whatever to get me a negative 7. Okay, so what numbers can I multiply to get a negative 8? Let's see, negative 1 times 8, positive 1 times negative 8, negative 2 times 4, positive 2 times negative 4. I think those are the only things that I can multiply to get negative 8. And again, I got negative 8 because I multiplied my a times my c. 4 times negative 2. That's where that came from. Okay, now the numbers that multiply to give me a negative 8 is negative 1 times 8, 1 times negative 8, negative 2 times 4, and 2 times negative 4. I got to figure out of those combinations which one will combine to get me a negative 7. And that would be this one. 1 and negative 8. Oh. So now at this point, it depends on which way your brain works. There are multiple ways to factor this. Some people use the guess and check method. One of the ways that I found that a lot of teachers have already taught and that makes sense to students is this little box method. So I'm crossing my fingers that this worked for you. If it doesn't, let me know and I can show you another way to factor. But we use the little box method. So I made myself a little box, 2 by 2. Okay, in my first box, that top left, goes whatever I had out in front. I have 4x squared. So here, guess what it goes? 4x squared. In my bottom right box goes my c, my negative 2. So 4x squared is my a, negative 2 or minus 2 is my c. Now, the two numbers I choose for here and here will be these two numbers, my 1 and my negative 8. And it doesn't matter where you put it. You can put it in either place. I don't really have a preference. It's just whichever way makes the most sense to you. So we'll have a positive 1 x and a negative 8 x. Miss, why did you put an x on there? I'm glad you asked. I put an x on here because if I put a negative 8 plus 1x, that's how I get that negative 7x, right? So that's why it's important to put the x's on there. Okay, now let's factor. I got to figure out what can I factor out of 4x squared and 1x. What do I have that's alike? In both of these I have an x, so I can factor an x out of both of them, right? Then I go down here and I have to figure out what can I factor out of a negative 8x and a negative 2, minus 8x minus 2. They both don't have an x, so I can't pull out an x. What number divides into a negative 8 and a negative 2? A negative 2, right? Okay, so for the top of the box, you can think of it a couple different ways. So one way you can look at it, you can look at 4x squared and negative 8x and say, what can I factor out? What's my greatest common factor of these two terms? Both of them have an x, so I can factor out x. My greatest common factor of 4 and negative 8, that would be 4. Now notice, when I multiply my x times my 4x, it gives me 4x squared. So I could have just said, x times something is 4x squared. X times what? And that still would have gave me this answer. Okay, so down here, I got me a 1x and a negative 2. The only number that I can use, my greatest common factor out of 1x and a negative 2 or minus 2 would be a 1. So my factors are the things I have listed at the top, 4x plus 1, and the thing I have listed on my side, x minus 2. Set them equal to 0. If you need to, go back and you can rewind it and rewatch that. That's why it's really good that we have videos. Okay, so now that it's factored, I go 4x plus 1 equals 0. I go x minus 2 equals 0. And I get to solve it. Minus 1, 4x equals a negative 1. The opposite of 4 times x is dividing by 4. X equals, and some people make that a negative 0.25. I'm just going to leave that as a negative 1/4. Unless my homework, really it depends on what your homework indicates. Alright, over here for this one, I go plus 2, x equals a positive 2. Alright, and it says check by substitution or by using the graphing utility. Alright, so those are our first three. So far so good. We've already completed 2 questions from your homework. Now mind you, the numbers might switch up a little bit, but it's the same concept.